He delivered the killing blow, not with a scream, but with a whisper, his voice smooth as the polished mahogany of the desk he'd bought with her inheritance. For 10 years, Clara Hayes had been the silent architect of his success, the ghostwriter of his emails, the patient wife who believed his ambition was their shared dream. He told her she was an anchor, a comfortable but dead weight holding him back from the life he deserved. The life he now planned to live with Jessica, his younger, more driven secretary. Clara watched the man she loved erase her from their future with the cold efficiency of a corporate takeover. But she never imagined that the ashes of her old life would be the very thing that would forge her into a queen, and that one day her ex-husband would beg for an introduction to the billionaire who called her by a single devastating name, wife. The silence in their minimalist, gray-toned living room was a living entity. It had been growing for months, creeping out from the cracks in their conversations and pooling in the spaces between them on their king-sized bed. Clara Hayes had tried to fill it at first. She'd chatter about her day volunteering at the community garden, about the new recipe she'd tried, about a funny article she'd read. But her words would just fall into the silence and vanish, absorbed without a ripple. Her husband, Richard Palmer, was the source of the quiet. He brought it home with him from Palmer and Sterling Financial, clinging to his tailored suits, like a fine cologne of discontent. He was a senior vice president, a title he wore with a mixture of pride and profound dissatisfaction. It wasn't enough. It was never enough. Tonight he finally gave the silence a voice. "Clara, we need to talk." She was curled on the sofa, a book open in her lap, though she hadn't turned a page in an hour. She knew this tone. It was the one he used before a strategic cull of his portfolio, precise and devoid of emotion. She placed a bookmark between the pages and closed the book, her heart beginning a slow, heavy drumbeat against her ribs. "I'm listening, Richard." He didn't sit. He paced his expensive leather shoes, making no sound on the thick wool rug she'd spent weeks choosing. He stopped by the large picture window that overlooked the manicured lawns of their suburban New Jersey neighborhood. He wasn't looking at the view. He was looking at his own reflection. "This isn't working anymore," he began the classic cowardly opening. "I feel like we're on two different tracks. I'm on an express train and you're at a local station, content to watch the trains go by." Clara felt a cold dread seep into her bones. "I don't understand. I've always supported you. Your career, your ambitions, they've always been our priority." She had given up her own burgeoning career as an art historian and consultant to support his. She managed their home, their social calendar, his life, so he could focus solely on climbing the corporate ladder. He turned from the window, and for the first time she saw the full extent of the coldness in his eyes. It was absolute. "That's just it, Clara. My career, my ambitions. You've been a wonderful manager for my life, but a partner needs to have their own drive. You're content. I find that I can't respect contentment anymore. It's a liability." The word struck her like a physical blow. A liability. 10 years of marriage, of love and sacrifice, reduced to a term on a balance sheet. "A liability," she whispered, her voice trembling. "I need someone who challenges me, who understands the world I operate in, someone who wants to conquer it with me." He ran a hand through his perfectly coiffed dark hair. "Jessica gets it. She has that fire." Jessica. His secretary. Of course. The late nights at the office, the hushed phone calls, the sudden obsession with a new brand of aftershave that Clara hadn't bought. The little puzzle pieces clicked into place with sickening clarity. Jessica Vance was 26, sleek and sharp-edged, with a law degree she used to eviscerate contracts and apparently marriages. "You're leaving me for your secretary." The question was cliché, pathetic, but it was all she could manage. "I'm leaving you for my future," he corrected her, the arrogance in his voice a shield against any potential guilt. "Jessica sees the man I can be, not just the man I am. You see, you're comfortable. You're my past. You're the small-town girl I married before I realized what I was capable of. And I've outgrown it. I've outgrown you." Each word was a carefully sharpened knife designed to gut her of her self-worth. He was dismantling their shared history, recasting her as a starter wife, a relic of a less ambitious time. "The house," she stammered, looking around the room they had built together. "I'll be fair, of course," he said, waving a dismissive hand. "My lawyer Robert Finch will be in touch with a generous severance package. Think of it that way. You can buy a nice little condo somewhere. Get back into your hobbies. It will be for the best. A severance package." He was firing her from their marriage. The finality of it was suffocating. This wasn't a fight. It wasn't a cry for help or a momentary lapse in judgment. It was a strategic decision. A corporate restructuring of his personal life. He had already moved on. His eyes were clear, his resolve absolute. He was already picturing Jessica in this room, on this sofa, in their bed. "I want you to be out by the end of the month," he said, his tone shifting to logistics. "I'll have a moving service arranged. Just tell them where to take your things." Her things. Not their things. He walked over to the bar cart, poured himself a glass of Macallan 25, the one they were supposed to be saving for their 10th anniversary next month, and took a slow, deliberate sip. He held the crystal tumbler, looking at her over the rim. "Don't make this messy, Clara. It's beneath you. It's beneath us. Let's just call it an amicable separation based on divergent life paths." She finally found her voice, a thread of steel weaving through the shock. "There is nothing amicable about this, Richard. You are a coward. You let me build my entire world around you, and now you're demolishing it because you found a newer, shinier model." He actually smiled, a thin, cruel slash of his lips. "Models get upgraded, Clara. That's just business. You should have kept up with the market." He finished his scotch, placed the empty glass on the cart with a soft click, and walked towards the door. He paused with his hand on the knob. "I'll be staying at my club for a few weeks until you're gone. Jessica and I are taking a trip to Aspen once everything is settled. A celebration." He didn't look back. The front door opened and closed with a quiet, decisive sound. And then the silence he had brought into the house rushed back in. But this time it was different. It wasn't empty. It was filled with the echoing cruelty of his words, the ghost of their dead marriage, and the terrifying, gaping void of Clara's future. She sat there on the sofa for hours, the forgotten book in her lap, as the perfectly curated gray room grew dark around her. The first week was a blur of hollow-eyed shock. Clara moved through the house like a ghost, touching objects that were suddenly alien to her. The photographs on the mantelpiece were lies. The shared coffee mugs in the kitchen were artifacts from a forgotten civilization. Richard was true to his word. On Monday morning, a crisp, impersonal email arrived from his lawyer, Robert Finch, outlining the generous terms of their separation. He was giving her enough to secure a small apartment and live for 6 months, provided she signed a non-disclosure agreement and waived any future claims to his rapidly growing assets. It was a pittance disguised as charity, a final insult. Her best friend Rebecca, a fiery redhead who worked as a trauma nurse, was her anchor. She arrived the night after Richard left, armed with 2 bottles of expensive wine and a torrent of righteous fury. The man is a sociopath, Clara. A textbook narcissist, Rebecca declared, pacing the living room rug that Richard had paced. A severance package. Did he offer you Cobra for your health insurance too? The absolute ghoul. Clara gave a watery, hiccuping laugh. It was the first sound other than a sob she'd made in 24 hours. He called me a liability Beck. He said I was holding him back. Holding him back from what? Becoming the world's most self-satisfied jerk. You proofread every report he ever wrote. You coached him for every presentation. You charmed the pants off his boss. Mr. Sterling at that Christmas party 2 years ago when Richard was a stuttering mess. He didn't climb a ladder. You pushed his sorry backside up every single rung. Rebecca was right. Clara had been the invisible engine of his success. And now she was being discarded like a used-up component. The movers Richard had hired arrived on a Tuesday. They were polite, efficient, and utterly impersonal as they packed up her things. Her books, her clothes, her art supplies from a life before Richard. As they wrapped a small, unassuming painting she'd bought at a flea market years ago, one of the movers paused. "This is nice. Looks old." Clara looked at the piece, a dark, moody landscape of the Scottish Highlands. "I always thought so. There's something about the brushwork." It was this forgotten part of her, the part that could see the history in a stroke of paint, the story in a layer of varnish, that began to stir. She found a small one-bedroom apartment in a less glamorous part of town. It had creaky floors and a view of a brick wall, but it was hers. Unpacking the boxes felt like an archaeological dig into her own life. Beneath the layers of the wife of Richard Palmer, she found the remnants of Clara Hayes. Her dusty art history textbooks from Columbia, her detailed notebooks filled with sketches and analysis of Renaissance portraiture, her dog-eared auction catalogs. The pain was still a raw, open wound, but a tiny spark of something else ignited within her anger. Not the helpless, tearful anger of a victim, but the cold, clear anger of someone who had been profoundly underestimated. He thought she was content, ambitionless. He had no idea. She had simply channeled all her ambition into him. One rainy afternoon, scrolling through job listings with a mug of cheap tea, she saw it. An advertisement for an assistant archivist at the Ainsworth Gallery, one of New York's most prestigious art houses. The pay was abysmal. The role was junior. For the former wife of a senior VP, it was a spectacular fall from grace. For Clara Hayes, the dormant art historian, it was a lifeline. She spent 3 days crafting her resume, digging out her academic transcripts, and writing a cover letter that bled with genuine passion. She poured all the analytical skill she'd once used to dissect Richard's corporate strategy into explaining her love for 16th century Flemish art. She got an interview, then a second. The gallery's director, a stern but brilliant woman named Ms. Genevieve Croft, grilled her relentlessly. She saw the 10-year gap in her resume. "You've been out of the field for a decade, Mrs. Palmer," Ms. Croft said, her eyes peering over her glasses. "It's Ms. Hayes, actually," Clara said, her voice steady. "And I haven't been out of the field. I simply haven't been employed in it. My eyes and my mind have never stopped working. Test me." Ms. Croft slid a photograph of an obscure painting across the table. Clara's heart leaped. She knew it. She launched into a detailed analysis of its provenance, its likely attribution, and the subtle iconographic details that most would miss. She was hired the next day. Her new life was a world away from the old one. She took the train into the city every morning, packed a simple lunch, and spent her days in the quiet, climate-controlled archives, surrounded by the scent of old canvas and paper. She was cataloging, researching, and learning. She was exhausted and poorly paid, but she felt more alive than she had in years. Meanwhile, Richard and Jessica were living their life loudly on social media. Photos from Aspen appeared, the two of them in designer ski gear, clinking champagne glasses in a hot tub. Jessica flashing a ridiculously large diamond on her ring finger. Richard's captions were nauseatingly smug. "Celebrating the next chapter with my co-pilot. Finally, with someone who flies at the same altitude." Rebecca would forward the post to her with a string of vomiting emojis. At first, each photo was a fresh stab of pain, but as weeks turned into months, Clara found she barely registered them. Richard's world of superficial gloss and performative success seemed distant and unreal compared to the tangible history she held in her hands every day. One afternoon, Ms. Croft called her into her office. "Clara, we have a new consignment. A very important one. The estate of a reclusive collector. I want you to handle the initial cataloging. It's heavy on Northern Renaissance, your specialty." It was a huge vote of confidence. Clara spent the next month immersed in the collection. It was magnificent. One piece in particular, a small portrait of a nobleman, captivated her. It was attributed to a minor artist from the studio of Hans Holbein, but Clara's instincts screamed otherwise. The detail in the subject's lace collar, the psychological depth in his eyes, the specific way the light caught the velvet of his doublet, it felt like the master's hand. She spent her nights poring over research, cross-referencing archives, and examining high-resolution digital scans until her eyes burned. She was convinced this wasn't a studio of peace, it was a lost Holbein. If she was right, it was worth tens of millions. If she was wrong, she would look like an arrogant fool. Taking a deep breath, she compiled her research into a detailed report and walked into Ms. Croft's office. She laid out her case, her voice filled with a quiet, unshakable confidence she hadn't felt in a decade. Ms. Croft listened, her expression unreadable. She examined the report, then the painting itself. Finally, she looked at Clara. "We'll need to bring in outside experts for verification," she said slowly. "But my gut tells me you might be right. This is extraordinary work, Hayes." Walking back to her desk, Clara felt a thrill that no catered dinner party or corporate gala had ever given her. Richard thought she was ambitionless. He had no idea what she was capable of. He had demolished her life, but in the ruins she was finally excavating her true self. The art world, for all its global reach, is a surprisingly small and insular community. News of a potential lost Holbein at the Ainsworth Gallery spread through the upper echelons like wildfire. Experts were flown in from London and Berlin. The gallery was buzzing with a nervous electric energy. Clara was at the center of it, a quiet but essential cog in the machine, providing her research and answering the probing questions of world-renowned academics. The consensus came back after 3 weeks of intense scrutiny. Clara Hayes was correct. The painting was authenticated as an early work by Hans Holbein the Younger. The value of the estate skyrocketed, and the Ainsworth Gallery was suddenly the epicenter of the art market. Ms. Croft gave Clara a rare, genuine smile and a significant promotion to junior curator. The discovery attracted the attention of the world's most serious collectors. Among them was a name that was spoken in hushed, reverent tones: Alistair Sterling. Alistair Sterling was a titan of industry, a man who had built a global logistics empire from a single rusty freighter. Now, in his late 60s, he was semi-retired, a widower, and notoriously private. His true passion was art, and he possessed one of the finest private collections in the world. He was also, as fate would have it, the silent primary partner in the financial firm where Richard worked, Palmer and Sterling. Richard had never met the man, of course. Alistair was a god. Richard was a lowly acolyte who only ever dealt with the board. One crisp autumn afternoon, Ms. Croft informed Clara that Mr. Sterling was coming to view the Holbein personally. The gallery would be closed to the public. He specifically asked for the researcher who identified the piece to be present. Ms. Croft said, her eyes fixed on Clara. "Don't be nervous. The man knows more than most museum directors. Just be yourself and answer his questions." Clara felt a tremor of anxiety, but it was quickly replaced by a surge of professional pride. She wore a simple but elegant dark blue dress, a stark contrast to the designer armor she used to wear for Richard's corporate events. This time she wasn't an accessory. She was the expert. Alistair Sterling was not what she expected. He wasn't a towering, intimidating figure. He was of average height with a warm, weathered face, kind eyes crinkled at the corners, and a full head of thick silver hair. He moved with a quiet, unassuming grace that belied the immense power he wielded. He greeted Ms. Croft warmly, then turned his attention to Clara. "Ms. Hayes," he said, his voice a pleasant, gravelly baritone. He shook her hand. His grip was firm and dry. "A pleasure to meet you. Your monograph on the piece was exceptional, persuasive, and brilliantly argued." Clara was momentarily stunned. He had read her research paper. "Thank you, Mr. Sterling. I'm glad it was of interest." For the next hour, they didn't just look at the Holbein, they discussed it. He bypassed the usual small talk of a buyer and went straight to the heart of the work. He asked about her theory on the sitter's identity, debated the political climate of the era reflected in the subject's attire, and pointed out a subtle detail in the background she herself had almost missed. He was her intellectual equal. More than that, he was her intellectual peer. The conversation flowed effortlessly, moving from Holbein to Dürer, from the Northern Renaissance to the Dutch Golden Age. He listened to her opinions with genuine focused attention, his head tilted slightly, a small appreciative smile on his lips. It was a level of engagement she had starved for in her marriage. Richard had always feigned interest in her passion, his eyes glazing over as she talked, waiting for his turn to speak about market trends or quarterly earnings. As the meeting concluded, Alistair turned to Ms. Croft. "Genevieve, the painting is magnificent. I will of course be placing a bid at auction." Then he looked back at Clara. "Ms. Hayes, your talent is wasted in an archive. You have a remarkable eye. One of the best I've ever encountered." Clara felt a blush creep up her neck. "That's very kind of you, sir." "It's the truth," he said simply. He handed her a business card. It was thick, cream-colored stock, with nothing but his name and a private phone number. "I am in the process of acquiring several new pieces for my personal collection and having my existing catalog reappraised. I find myself in need of a consultant with a fresh perspective. I would be honored if you would consider the role." Clara stood frozen for a moment, the card feeling heavy in her hand. It was a dream opportunity, the kind of job she had fantasized about before she had submerged her ambitions in Richard's. I don't know what to say, Mr. Sterling. Say you'll think about it. My assistant George will call you to arrange a time to discuss the details." He gave her a final warm smile and was gone, leaving a profound silence in his wake. Ms. Croft walked over, a knowing look on her face. "That, my dear Clara, is what we call a life-changing event. He has never, to my knowledge, made such an offer to someone so junior." Clara spent the next few days in a daze. The offer was staggering. The compensation Alistair's assistant outlined was more than Richard made in a year, but it was the work itself that thrilled her. The chance to work with a world-class collection, to be respected for her knowledge, to have her voice heard and valued. She accepted. Her last day at the Ainsworth Gallery was bittersweet. She had found a home there, a place to heal and rediscover herself. Ms. Croft shook her hand firmly. "Don't be a stranger, Hayes. You've earned this." Walking out of the gallery and into the bustling New York street, Clara felt a sense of profound and dizzying freedom. She was no longer Richard Palmer's discarded wife. She was no longer a junior archivist. She was Clara Hayes, art consultant to Alistair Sterling. She looked up at the towering skyscrapers, the symbols of power and ambition that had once seemed so alien and intimidating. For the first time she felt like she belonged among them. Not as a +1, but as a player in her own right. Alistair Sterling's primary residence was not a sterile glass penthouse, but a sprawling, ivy-covered stone manor in upstate New York, nestled amidst hundreds of acres of old-growth forest. The interior was not a monument to wealth, but a testament to a life of curated passion. Bookshelves groaned under the weight of first editions, antique maps adorned the walls, and everywhere there was art. Not just famous masterpieces, but pieces that clearly held personal meaning, creating a home that was both a world-class museum and an intimate personal space. Clara's first day was intimidating, but Alistair immediately put her at ease. He didn't treat her as an employee, but as a colleague. They spent their days in his private gallery, a custom-built wing of the house poring over canvases and sculptures. Their work was a slow, meticulous dance of research, analysis, and conversation. She discovered he was a man of quiet routines. They would work until 5, then he would retreat to his study for an hour, while she would walk the magnificent gardens. At 7 they would meet for dinner prepared by his long-standing housekeeper, Mrs. Gable. These dinners became the highlight of her day. Their conversations were wide-ranging and deep. They talked about art history and literature, but also about life. He spoke of his late wife, Helena, with a deep and abiding love that was touching, not mournful. He spoke of building his business, of the triumphs and the betrayals. He was a brilliant storyteller, and he had a way of asking questions that made Clara open up in a way she never had before. She told him about her marriage not in a bitter, accusatory way, but with the detached analysis of a historian examining a failed state. She spoke of her lost confidence and the slow, painful process of rebuilding it. "He saw your value only in how it reflected on him," Alistair said one evening, swirling the wine in his glass. A common mistake made by men of small vision. They think a wife is a mirror. A true partner is a window showing you a world you couldn't see on your own. In his presence, Clara felt herself transforming. The timid, heartbroken woman who had packed up her life in boxes was gone. In her place was a confident, articulate professional. She advised Alistair on acquisitions, negotiated with auction houses on his behalf, and even identified a clever forgery in a piece he was about to purchase, saving him a fortune and earning his profound respect. Their relationship deepened, evolving from professional to a close, comfortable friendship. He learned of her love for gardening and had a section of the greenhouse cleared for her to cultivate her own flowers. She learned of his secret passion for old black and white films, and they began a tradition of watching them in his private theater on Friday nights. The chemistry between them was a low, steady hum, built not on fleeting passion, but on a foundation of mutual admiration and genuine companionship. He made her laugh, a deep, uninhibited sound she thought she had lost. She challenged his assumptions, bringing a fresh perspective that delighted him. One evening, about 6 months into her employment, they were walking by the lake on his property as the sun set, painting the water in hues of orange and purple. "Clara," he said, his tone gentle, "this arrangement, working for me, it feels insufficient." Her heart skipped a beat. She feared he was letting her go. "Oh!" He stopped and turned to face her, taking both of her hands in his. His hands were warm and strong. "I find your presence here has become essential to my happiness, not as a consultant, but as a companion, as my dearest friend." He looked into her eyes, his own gaze clear and sincere. "I am an old man in some ways, and I believe in clarity over romance." Clara Hayes. "You are the most intelligent, kind, and remarkable woman I have ever known, aside from my dear Helena. The thought of my life without you in it has become unbearable." He paused, taking a breath. "I'm asking you to marry me, not as a business proposition or out of some sense of obligation, but because I believe our lives are better together, because you make me see the world anew." Tears welled in Clara's eyes. This wasn't a desperate plea or a grand, empty gesture. It was a proposal from a man who had seen every broken piece of her and deemed her priceless. It was a partnership of equals. "Yes," she whispered the word, feeling more right than anything she had ever said. "Yes, Alistair. Yes." He didn't produce a gaudy diamond. Instead, he slid a simple, elegant sapphire ring onto her finger. It had belonged to his grandmother. "I was hoping you'd say that," he said, a broad, happy smile spreading across his face. They were married a month later in a quiet ceremony in the Manor's garden, attended only by Rebecca, his assistant George, and Mrs. Gable. It was a perfect day filled with laughter and quiet joy. Clara moved from the guest wing into the master suite. Her life was now one of unimaginable privilege, but that wasn't what mattered. What mattered was the man she woke up next to every morning. A man who started each day by asking her opinion on an article in the Financial Times, and ended each night listening to her read poetry aloud. She was no longer a liability. She was no longer a severance package. She was the wife of Alistair Sterling. Not his trophy, not his mirror, but his partner, a restorer of art who had in the process found the person who restored her soul. She hadn't forgotten her past, but she had reframed it. It was no longer a story of loss. It was the prologue to a masterpiece. The invitation arrived on embossed cream-colored cardstock that felt heavy with importance. It was for the annual Metropolitan Museum of Art Charity Gala, the most exclusive event on the New York City social calendar. Alistair was a co-chair of the event, a position he usually treated as a necessary chore. "We should go this year," he said, passing the invitation to Clara over breakfast. "I think it's time I introduced my brilliant wife to the world." Clara felt a flicker of the old insecurity. That world of glittering facades and sharp-edged smiles was Richard's world. She had always felt like an imposter in it, a sparrow dressed in peacock feathers. Alistair must have seen the hesitation in her eyes. He reached across the table and covered her hand with his. "You are not going as an accessory, my love. You are going as you are. They will be the ones who are intimidated." His confidence was a balm to her soul. The weeks leading up to the gala were a pleasant flurry of activity. A renowned Parisian designer was flown in for private consultations. Clara chose a gown of deep emerald silk that shimmered like a beetle's wing. It was elegant, powerful, and understated. She wore it with the sterling sapphires, a necklace and earrings that matched her wedding ring, and her hair was swept up in a graceful chignon. When she descended the grand staircase of the manor on the evening of the gala, Alistair was waiting at the bottom. He was in a perfectly tailored tuxedo, but his eyes were only on her. He was speechless for a moment. Then a slow, admiring smile spread across his face. Helena always said a woman's beauty is her confidence made visible. He said, his voice thick with emotion. "Tonight, my dear, you are the most beautiful woman I have ever seen." The gala was a chaotic symphony of flashing cameras, champagne flutes, and the murmur of 1,000 conversations. Clara walked in on Alistair's arm, her posture poised, her gaze level. She was aware of the heads turning, the whispers. Alistair Sterling, the reclusive billionaire, had a new wife, and she was a mystery. Inside the great hall was a sea of power and influence. Tech moguls brushed shoulders with senators, and fashion icons mingled with hedge fund managers. Alistair navigated the crowd with ease, introducing Clara, not as my wife, but as Clara, my wife, giving her name equal weight. He would then add, "Clara is the one who discovered the Ainsworth Holbein," instantly establishing her as a person of substance, not just of status. She found herself engaged in fascinating conversations, holding her own, her opinions respected. Across the vast crowded room, Richard Palmer was trying to do the same with far less success. He and Jessica were distinctly B-list in this A-list universe. His firm had bought a table, and he was there to network, to press flesh, to desperately try and catch the eye of someone who mattered. He looked stressed, his smile a little too tight, his eyes darting around the room searching for opportunity. Jessica, clad in a revealing fire-engine red dress that was just a little too loud for the occasion, clung to his arm. She looked bored and annoyed, occasionally checking her reflection in the back of a silver spoon. This was the pinnacle they had aimed for, and now that they were here they were utterly insignificant. Richard's colleague and rival Gregory Vance sidled up to him. "Hear the big news?" Palmer Gregory smirked. "Alistair Sterling is here. First time in years. And he's remarried." Richard's ears perked up. This was it, the chance of a lifetime. If he could just get a moment, 5 minutes with the mythical founder of his firm, it could change his entire career. "Really? Who is she?" "No one seems to know," Gregory said, scanning the crowd. "Some say she's European royalty. Others say she's some brilliant academic. All I know is landing a meeting with Sterling tonight is the only bonus that matters. The hunt was on." Richard excused himself from Jessica, who was already complaining about her shoes, and began to work the room. He was a shark smelling blood, weaving through conversations, his eyes peeled for the silver-haired titan. Clara, meanwhile, was standing with Alistair near the grand floral centerpiece, deep in conversation with a French diplomat about a potential art exchange program. She felt a strange sense of calm. This world no longer terrified her. It was just a room full of people, some interesting, some not. Her value wasn't determined by their appraisal of her. She caught a glimpse of a familiar figure across the room. It was Richard. Her heart gave a single hard thump, a ghost of an old reflex, before settling. He looked small and anxious. He hadn't seen her yet. He was too busy scanning the faces of more important people. Alistair followed her gaze. "Is that—" "Yes," Clara said quietly. "That's Richard Palmer." Alistair's expression didn't change, but she felt his hand tighten ever so slightly on the small of her back, a silent gesture of support. "Life has a strange and often wonderful sense of narrative, doesn't it?" he murmured for her ears only. Richard was getting closer. He was making a beeline for the French diplomat, clearly hoping to use him as an entry point to the powerful-looking man standing next to him. His eyes were fixed on Alistair, filled with a desperate, hungry ambition. He hadn't even registered the woman on Alistair's arm. She was just part of the scenery. The stage was set. The ghosts of her past and the reality of her present were about to collide in the most public of ways. Richard saw his opening. The French diplomat was disengaging, turning to greet someone else. This left the great Alistair Sterling momentarily unoccupied. It was now or never. Smoothing down his tuxedo jacket and plastering on his most confident master of the universe. Smile, Richard strode forward. "Mr. Sterling, a pleasure to finally meet you in person." Richard Palmer. "Senior Vice President at Palmer & Sterling," he said, extending his hand. His voice was a touch too loud, a little too eager. Alistair turned his expression polite but neutral. He gave Richard's hand a brief, firm shake. "Mr. Palmer." Richard launched into his pre-rehearsed elevator pitch. "I just wanted to say what an honor it is to work for the firm you built. I'm heading up the new emerging markets division, and our Q3 projections are looking incredibly strong. I believe my aggressive strategy in the sector is precisely the kind of forward-thinking momentum the firm needs." He was so focused on his performance on selling himself that he barely glanced at the woman standing beside Alistair. In his mind, she was an elegant but irrelevant fixture, a wife to be acknowledged with a cursory nod once the important business was done. He saw a flash of emerald silk, a glint of sapphires, but his brain didn't process the information. His entire world was narrowed down to the impassive face of Alistair Sterling. Clara stood in perfect silence, her heart beating a steady, calm rhythm. She watched the man who had called her an anchor, a liability, now groveling before her husband. The irony was so thick it was almost suffocating. She didn't feel hatred or even pity. She felt a profound and complete sense of detachment, as if watching a scene from a film she'd already seen. Alistair listened patiently until Richard finished, his eyes never leaving the younger man's face. He let the silence hang in the air for a beat too long, making Richard's confident smile begin to twitch at the edges. "An aggressive strategy," Alistair repeated, his voice quiet, but carrying an immense weight that cut through the surrounding chatter. "Tell me, Mr. Palmer, does your strategy account for the human cost? Or do you simply write people off as liabilities when they no longer serve your immediate ambition?" Richard froze. The word liabilities was an odd choice, a strangely personal jab in a business context. A flicker of confusion crossed his face. He started to formulate a response, some corporate jargon about difficult but necessary decisions. But before he could speak, Alistair made his move. He turned slightly, placing a warm, possessive hand on Clara's back, drawing her forward. His gaze remained locked on Richard. "Mr. Palmer, your ambition is noted," Alistair said, his voice dropping into a register of pure ice. "But you seem to have overlooked the most valuable asset in the room. Allow me to introduce you. I believe you already know my wife, Clara." Richard's head turned. His eyes, which had previously skimmed over her, now truly saw her, and the world tilted on its axis. It was Clara. But it wasn't his Clara. His Clara wore cardigans and sensible shoes. His Clara was quiet, unassuming, her face perpetually etched with a faint worry about his well-being. This woman was a queen. Her eyes, which used to hold only adoration for him, now held a cool, calm assessment that made his blood run cold. The emerald dress, the sapphires that were worth more than his house, the regal posture, it was all wrong. It was impossible. His brain short-circuited. The confident smile evaporated, replaced by a slack-jawed gape. The words "my wife Clara" echoed in the sudden roaring silence of his mind. My wife. My wife. My wife. He looked from Clara's serene face to Alistair Sterling's stony one. The founder of his firm, the billionaire he idolized, married to the woman he had discarded like last year's model, the woman he had given a severance package. A cold sweat broke out on his forehead. Every cruel word he had ever said to her came rushing back. "You're an anchor. You're content. I've outgrown you. A liability." He had said those things about the wife of Alistair Sterling. The humiliation was so absolute, so total, that he felt physically ill. He couldn't breathe. Jessica, who had been watching from a distance, saw Richard's frozen horror. Annoyed at being abandoned, she started to walk over. "Richie, what's wrong?" "You look like you've seen a ghost." She stopped dead when she saw who he was staring at. Her sharp, calculating eyes took in the scene, Clara radiant and impossibly elegant, Alistair Sterling, his arm possessively around her, and Richard looking like a shattered statue. Her mind, always quick, did the math in a split second. She hadn't traded up for a winner. She had tied herself to the man who had thrown away the winning lottery ticket. The disgust on her face was immediate and undisguised. Clara finally spoke, her voice clear and steady, holding no trace of malice, only a quiet finality. "Richard, it's been a long time." He couldn't form words. He just stared, his mind a maelstrom of regret, jealousy, and sheer unadulterated panic. His entire career, his entire life was built on the perception of his own good judgment. And in one stunning, cataclysmic moment, he was revealed as the world's biggest fool. He hadn't just left his wife. He had insulted and discarded a Sterling. Alistair leaned in, his voice a low whisper meant only for Richard. "I suggest you enjoy the rest of your evening, Mr. Palmer. I have a feeling it may be the last pleasant one you have for some time." With a final dismissive glance, Alistair guided Clara away, his hand never leaving her back. They melted back into the glittering crowd, leaving Richard standing alone in the center of the floor, the noise of the gala returning to a dull roar around him. He was frozen, a monument to his own spectacular, life-altering stupidity. The fallout was not immediate and explosive, but a slow creeping rot that dismantled Richard's life with methodical precision. Alistair Sterling was too sophisticated for overt revenge. He didn't have Richard fired. He simply let the story of the gala do its work. And it did. Gregory Vance had witnessed the entire exchange and recounted it with gleeful detail to anyone who would listen. The story became legendary in the firm's corridors. Richard Palmer, the ruthless corporate climber, the man who had thrown away Alistair Sterling's wife. He became a punchline, a cautionary tale. His aggressive strategy in the emerging markets division was suddenly put under intense scrutiny. His proposals were dissected and found wanting. His budgets were slashed. The project he had been championing as his path to a board seat was quietly shelved, citing unforeseen market volatility. His colleagues looked at him with a mixture of pity and contempt. He was a marked man, his judgment irrevocably tainted. No one wanted to be associated with the fool who had called Clara Sterling a liability. Jessica was the first to abandon the sinking ship. She was a pragmatist above all else. A week after the gala, Richard came home to their sterile apartment to find her closets empty. A single perfectly manicured note was left on the kitchen island. "Richard, I'm afraid our life paths have diverged. This isn't the future I signed up for. My lawyer will be in touch about the condo." She had left him with the same cold corporate language he had used on Clara. The symmetry was not lost on him. He was left with an empty apartment, a stalled career, and the crushing weight of his monumental error. He would sometimes find himself driving past the old house he had shared with Clara, the one he had so cavalierly kicked her out of, and feel a pang of regret so sharp it felt like a physical wound. He hadn't just lost a connection to a billionaire. He had lost the one person who had ever truly believed in him, and he had been too blind to see it. For Clara, life moved in the opposite direction. The morning after the gala, she woke up feeling a sense of profound peace. The final ghost had been laid to rest. She hadn't needed revenge. She had simply needed to live and live well. Her life with Alistair was a true partnership. They traveled the world not as tourists, but as patrons and scholars of art. They established the Sterling Hayes Foundation, a charitable organization dedicated to art education for underprivileged children and the restoration of historical landmarks. Clara was the driving force behind it, her passion and expertise shaping it into a globally respected institution. She was no longer in anyone's shadow. She was a respected philanthropist, a brilliant curator, her name synonymous with taste and intellect. She gave lectures at universities and sat on the boards of museums. She had found not just love, but a purpose that was entirely her own. One afternoon, a year after the gala, she and Alistair were sitting in the garden of their manor. The flowers she had planted when she first arrived were in full glorious bloom. Alistair was reading the paper and Clara was sketching in a notebook. "Interesting," Alistair murmured from behind the business section. "What is it, my love?" Clara asked without looking up. "Palmer & Sterling just announced a major corporate restructuring. A significant number of senior management are being let go to streamline operations for future growth. Richard Palmer's name is on the list." Clara paused her sketching. She looked at the vibrant roses, the sturdy oaks, the serene blue of the sky. She thought of Richard not with anger or satisfaction, but with a distant clinical detachment. He was a closed account, a balance sheet from a company that had long since gone out of business. His story was over. Hers was still being written. She picked up her pencil and returned to her drawing. "That's a shame for him," she said, her voice even. "I hope he lands on his feet." And she meant it. His fate no longer had any bearing on her happiness. It was a footnote in her biography. Alistair put down his paper and smiled, his eyes filled with love and admiration for the incredible woman beside him. He reached out and gently touched her hand. "You, my dear Clara," he said softly, "have the most generous soul I have ever known." She smiled back, a genuine, radiant smile that reached her eyes. The past was settled, the present was beautiful, and the future was a vast, unpainted canvas waiting for her to make her mark. There you have it. The story of how a woman discarded and underestimated found her true worth, not in revenge, but in rediscovering herself. Clara's journey reminds us that our value is never determined by someone else's inability to see it. Sometimes the most devastating endings are merely clearing the way for breathtaking new beginnings. It's a powerful lesson that betrayal doesn't have to be the end of your story. It can be the catalyst that launches you into a life you never dreamed was possible. If this story of triumph and poetic justice resonated with you, please show your support by hitting that like button. Share this video with someone who might need to hear that their best chapters are still ahead. And most importantly, subscribe to our channel and turn on notifications so you won't miss our next story. What are your thoughts on Richard's downfall and Clara's ultimate victory? Let us know in the comments below. We love hearing from you.